Millionaire abandons his wheelchair-bound son, leaving him alone in the world, without understanding why his own father rejected him. The little boy shouts tirelessly, "Don't do this, Dad." Years later, what happens is surprising. Before the story begins, comment below from which city you are watching. Enjoy the story. The sun was low, painting the sky orange and gold, as Luke sat alone on the deserted road. Sitting in his wheelchair, he looked at his dad's car a few meters ahead. This was the moment everything would change. "Please, Dad, don't leave me here," Luke shouted, his voice trembling. But the response he got wasn't what he expected. Mark remained silent, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. The weight of his decision was clear on his face, but there was no sign of doubt. Without a word, Mark began to step out of the car. Luke tried to move, but the wheelchair wheels dragged heavily on the dirt, not advancing. He didn't know what to expect, but felt something was wrong. The feeling of being left there, in that empty and distant place, began to take shape. "Dad. No. Please." Luke's voice was a plea, but his father didn't stop. Mark walked towards the car and got back in. Luke still watched, not understanding. With one last look, Mark started the engine and, without hesitation, drove off down the road. The distance between them grew. As Luke watched, he felt smaller and smaller, as if his words were getting lost in the vastness of the road. Luke's wheelchair, once a symbol of mobility, now felt like a weight greater than he could bear. He didn't know how to move forward. He was stuck, not just physically, but emotionally. The abandonment, however, was more real than any obstacle he might face on the road. As Mark's car disappeared on the horizon, Luke found himself alone. He looked at the road ahead and for a moment felt like shouting again, but nothing came out. The only sound he could hear was the wind rustling through distant trees and the hum of heavy silence. What to do now? Where would he go? He didn't know, but felt that somehow he needed to find a way. The heat of the road still hung in the air, but Luke could no longer focus on the setting sun. He was lost in his thoughts, his eyes fixed on the horizon line, trying to understand what had happened. The sound of a car engine coming from afar made Luke lift his head. At first, he thought it was his dad coming back, but as he looked closer, he saw a white pickup truck approaching. The vehicle stopped in front of him, kicking up a cloud of dust that quickly dissipated. The driver's window rolled down slowly, and a soft, welcoming female voice came from inside. "Are you okay, dear?" Kathy, a woman in her 50s, looked at Luke with concern. She had kind eyes, and her smile, though a bit hesitant, seemed promising. Luke watched her warily, still processing what had just happened. He didn't know if he could trust strangers, but there was no one else in sight. Deep down, he felt that he couldn't stay there, waiting for something that would never happen. I'm just... Luke stammered, not knowing how to explain the emptiness he felt. He pointed to the road. "My dad. He left me." Kathy was silent for a moment, as if absorbing the pain in his words. Then, without hesitation, she opened the door and approached. "Let's take you home. It's okay now. We won't leave you alone." John, her husband, got out from the passenger side. He looked at Luke with a welcoming smile but said nothing. His look spoke for itself, understanding, without rushing the boy to speak. John knew he needed time. "I'm John," he said calmly. "We'll take care of you." Kathy helped Luke settle into the truck, and though he had a lump in his throat, something inside him began to relax. The simple act of concern, of not being ignored, of being seen, made the words harder to say. He didn't know how to react, but the calm presence of the couple seemed to lift the weight of the silence that oppressed him. As they drove down a winding road leading to a small town called Santa Lucia, the inside of the car felt like a refuge from the world outside. Kathy and John chatted among themselves, asking simple questions and offering peaceful answers. Nothing rushed Luke, who was still immersed in his own feelings of loss. When they arrived at the couple's house, A simple but cozy home with a well-tended garden and colourful flowers, Luke was greeted with unexpected warmth. Kathy helped him out of the truck and led him to a comfortable chair in the living room where he could rest. John, meanwhile, began preparing something to eat. "You're safe here," Kathy said, pulling a blanket over Luke's shoulders. "Everything will be all right." Despite the pain and confusion that still clouded his mind, Luke felt a comforting sensation for the first time in hours. He didn't know why these strangers were being so kind, but there was something about them that made him believe that perhaps, just perhaps, he could start to rebuild something from that moment. That night, he sat silently, observing the house around him. Every detail, every act of kindness seemed new and strange to him. But slowly, he got used to the idea that the loneliness of that road was behind him. And maybe, with Kathy and John, he could start to find something he didn't know he was looking for: a new beginning. The weeks passed smoothly in Kathy and John's house. The summer heat gave way to cool, pleasant nights, but Luke still felt the weight of abandonment. Every corner of the house seemed like a new world to him, strange and welcoming at the same time. He still didn't know how to fit in there, but the silent and constant love of Kathy and John began to build a bridge he could slowly lean on. Kathy, with her gentle and intuitive manner, seemed to understand Luke without him needing to say a word. She knew he was recovering, but also knew he carried scars he didn't even understand. It was as if Luke's own silence was a protective layer, a defense against the world and the pain he still couldn't fully process. One quiet afternoon, while Luke was in the garden, watching the colorful flowers sway gently in the wind, Kathy appeared with a surprise. She held something in her hands, and her eyes shone with a mix of enthusiasm and delicacy. "I found something I think you'll like," she said with a welcoming smile. When she revealed the guitar, Luke looked curious, not understanding. "Guitar?" he asked, not very interested at first. The idea of learning to play seemed distant. He was still trying to figure out what he wanted in life, and music to him seemed like just a pastime that might be fun, but not something that would help him solve his problems. "Yes, a guitar," Kathy replied, with a knowing smile. "When I was younger, I used music to express myself. I think it can help you express what you're feeling. Sometimes, it's easier to put our feelings into notes and melodies than into words." Luke wasn't sure what to think, but his curiosity outweighed his skepticism. He reached out hesitantly, touching the strings with his fingertips. The sound of the guitar, soft and deep, made his heart beat faster. Something in the vibration of that instrument seemed to resonate with him, as if the guitar was trying to tell him a secret. Kathy sat beside him and began to guide him patiently. She taught him to hold the strings and move his fingers smoothly, teaching him simple chords. At first, Luke was tense, his hands not moving the way he wanted. But Kathy didn't rush him. She just smiled and encouraged him to try again. "Don't hurry," she said. "Music is like life. Sometimes, you just need time to find your rhythm." In the days that followed, Luke spent more time with the guitar. At first, he just plucked a few notes and played chords without much precision. But as the weeks went by, something inside him began to change. He didn't know exactly what was happening, but as he played, he felt a kind of relief. The notes seemed to draw out feelings he didn't know existed within him. One evening, after school, Luke was in the garden again, the guitar resting in his hands. He was trying to play something more complex, a melody he had imagined in his head, but found difficult to translate onto the strings. He was frustrated, but at the same time, something inside him refused to give up. He wanted the music to come from his heart in a pure way, something that was truly his. That's when John appeared in the garden. He watched Luke for a moment, and with a simple smile, approached him. "Trying to play something new, huh?" he asked, his voice calm and encouraging. "Yes," Luke replied, a bit surprised that he had noticed. "I'm trying to make a melody, but it's not coming out the way I want." John sat down beside him, watching attentively as Luke tried again. "Music has its own pace, Luke. You don't need to rush it. Sometimes the sound you're looking for comes when you least expect it." Lucas thought about John's words and took a deep breath. He wasn't just trying to learn how to play. He was trying to understand what music meant to him, what it could do for his soul. With a new perspective, he tried again. This time, the notes began to flow more easily. He felt that something was being born there, something he could call his own. Over time, Luke became more comfortable with music. It wasn't just a way to pass the time or a new hobby. For him, music became a form of expression, a way to deal with feelings he couldn't put into words. As he mastered the chords and melodies, a new confidence emerged in him. He began to feel that, somehow, he was finally reconnecting with himself. Let's play a game with those who only read the comments. Type waterfall if you've made it this far. Only those who get this far will understand. Now, let's get back to the story. It was then that Kathy, noticing Luke's growing passion for music, suggested something that made his heart race. "Luke, there's a talent show in town next week," she said, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. "Have you ever thought about performing? I'm sure your music can touch people's hearts." The fear of performing in front of an audience arose immediately, but the idea of showing his music to others also seemed exciting. Luke looked at Kathy, and, although he was nervous, something warm grew in his chest. The idea of sharing something so personal and intimate with others attracted him. He knew it would be difficult, but he also felt that this could be the next step in his journey. "I don't know, Kathy," Luke said, hesitant. "I'm really shy. And what if people don't like it?" Kathy smiled gently. "Luke, the music you play comes from your heart. It doesn't matter how it sounds to others. What matters is what it means to you. When you put your truth into music, it doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be yours." Those words resonated deeply within Luke. He knew he was ready to take that step, no matter how scary it was. Music, which began as a simple refuge, now became a means of transformation, a path to rediscover his own strength. And maybe, by sharing this music with others, he could finally leave behind the weight of abandonment and move forward. The night of the event arrived faster than Luke expected. When Kathy first mentioned the talent show, he didn't believe he would actually participate. But as the date approached, nervousness grew inside him like a silent storm. The idea of performing for an audience scared him deeply, but at the same time, there was something inside him that pushed him to move forward. In the days leading up to the event, Luke spent hours practicing. The guitar became an extension of his own soul, and he knew that his music carried something more than just notes and chords. It was the expression of his pain, his inner struggle, and also his hope. But even so, the fear of failing consumed him. What if nobody likes it? What if I make mistakes? What if my music isn't good enough? These thoughts circled his mind as he rehearsed, but he knew that if he wanted to move forward, he would have to face these fears head on. The night before the show, Kathy found him sitting on the couch, guitar in hand, but his fingers trembling. She sat next to him and, without rushing, gently placed a hand on his arm. "Luke, I know you're scared, but remember something I told you before. The music is yours, and that's enough," Kathy said with a soft smile. "You don't need to be perfect. The important thing is that when you play, you're being honest with your feelings. People will feel that." Luke looked at her, his eyes still full of insecurity, but also with a spark of something new, confidence. He knew he was in a safe place, surrounded by people who believed in him. He didn't fully believe in himself yet, but he wanted to try. On the night of the show, Kathy and John took him to the community center where the event would take place. When they arrived, Luke was impressed by the number of people there. The atmosphere was lit up and full of energy, and he felt the nervousness increasing in his chest. The smell of popcorn in the air, the lively conversations, the laughter, all of it seemed so distant, so different from what he was used to. "It will be all right," John said with a calm smile, placing a hand on Luke's shoulder. "We're here with you, and remember, no matter what happens, the important thing is that you're doing this. You're already a winner." Luke nodded, trying to believe John's words, but the fear was still present. When it was his turn to perform, his stomach was tight and his arms felt heavy. He walked onto the stage, guitar in hand, and looked at the audience. The faces of the people seemed blurred, as if they were farther away than they actually were. He could hear his own heartbeat, strong and irregular. It was then that he closed his eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and remembered Kathy's words. The music is yours. Be honest. When his fingers touched the guitar strings, a wave of calm washed over him. He felt the familiarity of the instrument, the way his hands already knew the notes, as if he and the guitar understood each other. The tension in his body began to fade, and he lost himself in the melody that started to take shape. The first note sounded soft, but full of emotion. Luke opened his eyes and saw that the audience was watching him in silence. He hesitated for a moment but didn't stop. The following notes came out more naturally, as if the music was flowing from the depths of his soul. He felt the words he couldn't say transforming into each chord. Every strum was an expression of his journey, his fear, but also his courage. The music wasn't perfect. There were moments when he felt a bit off rhythm, or when the strings seemed out of tune. But instead of getting lost in these mistakes, Luke focused on what he was trying to convey. And suddenly, he wasn't worried about what people thought anymore. He was playing for himself, for the boy who had overcome so much, for the boy who now understood that in every mistake, there was an opportunity to grow. When the last note was played, silence filled the room for a few seconds that seemed eternal. Then, without warning, the audience erupted in applause. Luke stood still, looking at the audience, not knowing how to react. The sound of the applause was like a gentle wave, as if he had been enveloped by something bigger than him, something he didn't expect. He smiled, in a shy but genuine way. For the first time, he felt he was being seen in a true way, for who he really was. After the performance, Kathy and John approached him, their eyes shining with pride. "You were amazing, Luke," Kathy said, her voice emotional. "I knew you had something special inside you." John smiled and put an arm around him. "I knew you could do it. That was your music, Luke. You managed to put everything you are into it." Luke felt a wave of gratitude, and for the first time in a long time, he felt he wasn't alone anymore. He had overcome his greatest fear, self-doubt. The music had not only freed him, but also connected him with others in a way he never imagined. He was no longer the boy abandoned on the road. He was someone who had found his voice, his expression, and more importantly, his strength. After the talent show, Luke's life changed in ways he couldn't even imagine. Applauded by the audience and praised for his courage, he felt for the first time that he was being seen in an authentic way. But something deeper ignited within him when he realized that his music touched not only his own heart, but that of many others as well. The feeling of connection was overwhelming. He, who had always felt isolated, now understood the power of music to unite people and give them something common to lean on, a universal language. For weeks, the words of others about his performance accompanied him. "You have something special," many said. "Your music touched our souls," said an elderly lady from the audience. These words kept echoing in his mind. He knew something had happened, but he didn't know exactly what. What was this something his music had caused? What could he do with this new sensation that was emerging within him? It was then that Kathy suggested something simple but deeply transformative. They were sitting in the living room of their house, where Luke usually spent his days playing the guitar and thinking about life. "Luke," Kathy said, with that attentive look he already knew well, "what if you used music to help other kids? Kids who, like you, need something that makes them feel they belong, something that makes them see they have immense value, regardless of the difficulties they face. Have you ever thought about creating a music project aimed at children with disabilities?" Luke fell silent, thoughtful. The idea seemed immense, but at the same time, something inside him began to shine. He had always known that music was his form of communication, but he had never thought about how it could be a way of connecting for others as well. He remembered how he felt in school when he found support from Kathy and John, and how, through music, he had learned to express his deepest feelings. If he could offer that to others, maybe he was creating something that could change many lives. Kathy and John immediately supported the idea, offering help and even suggesting that he start working on the project's name and how to structure it. But Luke knew that to make it a reality, he would need more than just family support. He would need the community. And with that mindset, he began to work. Luke spent the following weeks developing the concept of the music project. The name he chose was Melodies from the Heart, something that reflected the idea that music is not just a technique or skill, but a true expression of what we feel, of what we carry in our hearts. He knew he wanted to create something inclusive, where all children, regardless of physical or emotional limitations, had a place to express and connect. He started recruiting other young musicians and seeking volunteers to help structure the project. And the community of Santa Clarita, a small California town where Luke lived, quickly got involved. The community center offered its space for rehearsals, and local merchants committed to donating instruments. The response was so warm and enthusiastic that Luke could hardly believe how quickly everything was happening. But the most exciting moment was when the first children with disabilities signed up. When Sophie, a girl with cerebral palsy, arrived at the community center, Luke could hardly believe what he saw. Sophie, who used a wheelchair and had motor difficulties, seemed shy, but her eyes were full of curiosity and vibrant energy. When she heard the music, it was like a light was turned on inside her. She wanted to sing, she wanted to participate. Luke knew the project would be a challenge, but it was exactly the kind of challenge he was looking for. He wanted to create an environment where everyone could be heard, where each person was treated with respect and valued for their abilities, not their limitations. He didn't want anyone to feel excluded. The first rehearsal was a moment of great emotion. The children began arriving slowly, accompanied by their parents, caregivers, and volunteers. There was an energy in the air, a mix of excitement and apprehension, but also a palpable sense that something important was about to happen. Luke, with his guitar, was the first to position himself in front of the group. He started with a simple song, a soft melody, and gradually passed it on to the others. Sophie sang her first note, despite difficulties controlling her breath and voice. It wasn't perfect, but it was authentic. It was hers, and that was enough. With each rehearsal, the magic began to form. Luke guided each child according to their abilities and challenges, adjusting the instruments and the rhythm as needed. Some used their feet to play, others, like Sophie, sang with the help of a speech therapist in the group. Every progress, no matter how small, was celebrated with joy. They were creating something truly unique. The impact on the community was immediate and profound. Parents who never imagined their children could get involved with music now saw their kids light up with the opportunities the project provided. And with each performance, the confidence of all participants grew. The group began to feel like a real family, where everyone was committed to the music, but also to the idea of inclusion and acceptance. The first project event was a milestone. The performance took place in a local auditorium, and the audience was full of community members. Parents, friends, neighbors. All were there to support the children and mainly to witness something much deeper than just a musical performance. They were witnessing a moment of union, a moment when everyone, regardless of their differences, became one. When Luke's group took the stage, there was a silence filled with expectation. The soft stage light illuminated the children's faces, who were nervous but excited. When they began to play, the music was simple but full of emotion. The notes came out with a unique tone, as if each child was singing or playing, not just for the audience but for themselves, for their own hearts. The audience's reaction was immediate. Tears began to appear in many eyes. Parents hugged their children, and even people who were there just to watch the event without expecting much found themselves completely touched by the sincerity and strength of that performance. With each applause, Luke felt a sense of belonging and purpose he had never experienced before. He knew music had the power to unite, but now he saw that it also had the power to transform. And so, the Melodies from the Heart project became something much bigger than he ever imagined. It wasn't just an opportunity for children with disabilities to express their music. It was a way to show the world that inclusion was not only possible, but essential. It was a reminder that every person has a unique voice, and that by coming together, we are much stronger. Luke looked at the smiling faces of the children around him and felt, for the first time, that his journey was no longer about him. It was about all of them. About the power of music, about the power of community, and about the power of inclusion. And more than that, it was about the power to transform lives, his and everyone else's. The opportunity to perform at a bigger event came in a way that Luke and the children never imagined. The event, called Music for All Festival, would be held in San Francisco, in a large auditorium where artists from all over the country gathered to promote inclusion through music. The news that Luke's project had been selected to perform was met with excitement and also a bit of nervousness. It was a unique chance for the children to show the world what they had built, but it was also a huge responsibility. The group rehearsed with more intensity than ever in the weeks leading up to the event. Luke, now more confident in his role as a leader, encouraged each participant to give their best. He knew that this performance wasn't just another presentation, it was a symbol of the power to transform lives, to break barriers, and to show the world that people with disabilities were no less capable of achieving their dreams. As rehearsals went on, there was a palpable energy in the air. Each child knew how much this event meant. Sophie, who had become one of the group leaders, helped encourage the others with her enthusiasm and determination. She, who had once been afraid to expose herself, was now ready to sing and shine, knowing that her voice, like everyone else's, had immense value. The preparation was long and challenging, with hours of practice and adjustments to the musical arrangements, but nothing seemed to stop everyone's desire to make it happen. The trip to San Francisco was a real adventure. The group, with their families and volunteers, left Santa Clarita in an adapted bus to ensure everyone's comfort. During the trip, Luke sat next to Sophie, who was excited about what was to come. They talked about everything, from the nervousness to the excitement of being able to play on such an important stage. Luke looked out the bus window and thought about the journey he and everyone else had taken to get there. The road seemed long, but every mile traveled symbolized how much they had overcome. When they arrived in San Francisco, the impact of the big city was immediate. The skyscrapers, the busy streets, and the sea of people created a sense of awe, but also humility. It was a completely different world from what they were used to, but at the same time, everyone was there for a greater cause, to show the world that inclusion is possible and essential. The event was scheduled to take place at the Golden Gate Theatre, one of the city's most famous theatres. When they arrived at the venue, the group was warmly welcomed by the event team and other artists who were equally committed to the message of inclusion and equality. Luke felt a mix of nervousness and pride. He looked at the children, whose eyes shone with anticipation, and remembered everything they had accomplished. They were about to perform on a prestigious stage, but more than that, they were about to show the world the importance of giving a voice to everyone, regardless of their limitations. On the night of the performance, the theatre was packed. People of all ages and backgrounds were present to support the cause of inclusion. The audience was not only composed of family and friends, but also of people who perhaps for the first time were seeing a performance by artists with disabilities. Luke's group was the last to perform, and as the night progressed, he could feel the tension in the air. The nervousness was visible on the children's faces, but there was also something more, a sense of anticipation, that this moment was theirs, that they had earned this space with much effort and dedication. When it was time for Luke's group to take the stage, the audience was already applauding enthusiastically, eager for the performance. They stepped onto the stage, with the soft light reflecting on their faces and their eyes shining with emotion. Luke picked up his guitar, Sophie positioned herself beside him, and the others picked up their instruments and got ready. Silence fell over the theatre as the first chord was played, and when Sophie's voice echoed through the room, it was as if time had stopped. The lyrics of the song, written by Luke, spoke of overcoming, of finding strength even in adversity, and of the beauty of diversity. Every note played, every word sung, carried a power that no one in the theatre could ignore. The audience was in deep silence, completely absorbed by the sincerity of the performance. It was impossible not to be moved by seeing children with disabilities, who are often marginalized, performing with such passion and skill. The sound filling the auditorium was not just music, it was a message of hope, acceptance, and inclusion. When they finished, silence took over for a brief moment before the applause began. The visibly moved audience gave a standing ovation. The children looked at each other, surprised and emotional. It was not just a recognition of their musical talent, but a recognition of their humanity, of their ability to transform. Luke looked at Sophie and smiled. She had conquered the stage in a way she had never imagined possible, and so had he. Let's have some fun with the readers in the comments. Type sunshine if you've made it this far. Now let's get back to the story. After the performance, several people approached, some with tears in their eyes, others with wide smiles. One of the event's producers, approaching Luke, said, "You and your group have something that few artists possess. You are not just playing music, you are touching hearts." Those words remained etched in Luke's memory. He had gone on that stage intending to show the power of music, but he had also shown the power of community, of inclusion, and above all, of courage. That night, Luke felt stronger than ever. He knew his journey was just beginning. What started as a small project had transformed into something much bigger, something that could inspire the world. Music, as he had learned, was a universal language, capable of transforming everything around it. As the music project grew and expanded, Luke felt the weight and beauty of the change that had happened in his life in a way he never imagined possible. Each step of the journey, from the difficult moments of adaptation to the triumphs of their performances, was sculpting a new version of himself. He was no longer that boy who had been left behind on the deserted road, lost and hopeless. Now, he was a leader. Not just a leader of a group of talented children, but a leader of a movement that touched hearts and broke barriers. He had, in some way, transformed into a living symbol of overcoming, and that still surprised him. The transformation was not only visible in the people around him, but especially within him. Luke no longer saw the wheelchair as an obstacle. It was part of who he was, but it did not define him. He saw himself in a different way. The pain and suffering that had accompanied him for so many years now seemed like a distant echo. That feeling of being invisible, of being treated differently, had been replaced by something more powerful, the certainty that his voice, his art, and his being mattered. He began to realize that his journey had a greater purpose than he could have imagined. Sitting on a bench in a quiet park in Santa Clarita, Luke reflected on everything he had been through. It was a clear, sunny day, and he liked to come there when he wanted to think clearly. The gentle wind swayed the trees around, and the sound of children playing in a nearby field made him smile. He was completely immersed in his thoughts when he began to remember the moments that had brought him there. How many things have happened since that day my father left me behind, he thought as he looked at the horizon. He vividly remembered that fateful afternoon when the pain of being abandoned took over his heart. But now, looking at his life felt different. He was no longer stuck in the past. What truly marked him was not the abandonment, but how much he had rebuilt himself since that moment. Luke now understood that the moments of pain and suffering had been just part of his story. They did not define him. What truly defined his life were the choices he made after being left behind. It was when he found the right people, like Kathy and John, that he began to understand that true strength did not come from never falling, but from getting up each time the world seemed to want to knock him down. They taught him to look within himself and find the strength to move forward. Through the music project, Luke not only found his talent, but also allowed himself to trust others. Music helped him open his heart in a way he never imagined possible. He had become the leader of the chorus of overcoming, but with that, he had also become a mentor, a guide for others. He not only inspired the children, but also began to be inspired by them. He saw in each of them the same strength he had discovered in himself, the ability to fight against all odds and find joy in the journey. The impact of the music project was far beyond what he had imagined. Over the months, many people began to seek out Luke to thank him or ask for advice. Parents of children with disabilities approached him, saying that their children now believed in themselves differently, that they had more confidence and were willing to face challenges that once seemed impossible. The children, once withdrawn and insecure, now sang, danced, and played with an energy and passion that did not go unnoticed. For Luke, this was the greatest reward. Realizing that he was helping to change so many lives made him feel a mix of humility and pride. He never imagined he would have this kind of impact on others' lives. Each time someone came to him to share how the project had changed their lives, he became more convinced that this was the right path for him. But at the same time, he began to understand the enormous responsibility that came with it all. It was during one of these encounters that Luke had an epiphany. During a lecture at a local school, where he was invited to talk about his project and his experience, he looked into the eyes of the children in the audience and felt a chill. They were looking at him as if they saw a different person, not as the boy in the wheelchair, but as someone with a mission, someone who would help them see that they too had immense value. As he stepped onto the stage, Luke felt a nervousness he had never felt before. He had performed countless times, but this time it was different. He was there to talk about his journey, not just as a leader, but as someone who had lived what these children were living. When he began to speak, his voice faltered at first, but soon he recovered. What he said was simple, but loaded with meaning. I know what it's like to be afraid. I know what it's like to look at others and feel that you'll never be good enough. But throughout this journey, I've learned that being good enough doesn't mean being perfect. It means allowing yourself to be who you are and believing you have something special. Music taught me that, and I hope that all of you find something that makes you feel that way, whether it's music, art, sports, or anything else. It doesn't matter what others say, or what you sometimes think of yourself. What matters is that you never stop trying, never stop being you. When he finished speaking, the silence in the room was almost tangible. It was a silence of reflection, of understanding, of a shared moment that touched something deep in the hearts of every child and every adult present. Luke's words were not just a speech. They were a reminder of what it meant to believe in oneself and the power of community. He was no longer talking about the challenges of being a person with a disability. He was talking about the common humanity of everyone, about the ability to overcome adversity and transform the lives of those around him. In those moments, Luke realized the true meaning of his journey. He was no longer just rebuilding himself. He was creating something greater than himself. His project, his music, his story were helping others find themselves and believe they were capable. He was no longer that boy abandoned on the road. He was now a symbol of hope, a catalyst for change. The most profound aspect of this transformation was the realization that while helping others, he was also helping himself. Luke discovered that true overcoming was not about never failing or having difficulties, but in how he got up day after day and kept fighting. Luke's life, once marked by abandonment and pain, was now filled with meaning, purpose, and human connection. He knew that his journey would not end there. The project would continue to grow, and new opportunities would arise. But Luke also knew that the most important thing was what he had achieved within himself, a clear vision of who he was, the impact he could make, and, perhaps most importantly, that he had a place in the world just as he was. Luke's life felt like an emotional roller coaster. Since starting his music project, everything seemed to have finally fallen into place in some way. He was no longer lost in the pain of abandonment or the shadows of a childhood marked by an absent father. His new life, with music as his great ally, provided him with a deep sense of purpose and belonging. But there was one issue that still troubled him, a ghost that refused to be forgotten. The figure of Ricardo, his father. The message he had received months earlier from his father, trying to reconnect, left him with a mix of feelings he didn't know how to process. "Hi, Luke. It's your dad. I'd really like to talk to you. I know I did terrible things in the past, but I'd like to try to apologize and explain my reasons. When the time is right for you, I'd love to talk. Best wishes." Luke spent weeks avoiding thinking too much about it. On the one hand, he didn't know how to deal with his father's words, especially after so many years of abandonment. The pain of being left on the road, lonely and without anyone, was still fresh in his memory. How could he simply turn the page after everything that had happened? It wasn't something simple. And on the other hand, something inside him urged him to take that step, to confront this chapter of his life. He knew this was an opportunity to close a cycle, but he didn't know if he was ready for it. At that time, Luke was still undergoing a deep transformation. Music, his choir project, the connection with children and adults who had been inspired by his journey, all of this was creating a new version of himself. He was no longer the fragile, scared boy. He had become someone capable of guiding others, of inspiring with his example. But what he didn't know was that to complete himself, he also needed to confront the man who had left him. Not for him to become a fundamental part of his life again, but for him to be able to find peace. Luke spent a lot of time reflecting on the message. The fear of opening up and being hurt again was present, but at the same time, there was a desire to understand his father. The desire to hear his side of the story, to understand what had been going through the mind of the man who had abandoned him, to try to put together the pieces of the puzzle that had always been incomplete. He talked to Kathy and John, who had always been his pillars. They were by his side when the subject came up and helped him understand his own feelings better. Kathy, with her quiet wisdom, told him, "Luke, forgiveness is not a burden you carry for someone else. Forgiveness is a key that frees you. It doesn't mean forgetting what happened, but looking at what you've built and allowing yourself to move forward without the weight of the past." Those words from Kathy made Luke reflect deeply on forgiveness. He knew he had grown a lot since that moment of abandonment. His identity was stronger than ever, and he didn't want to carry the ghosts of the past. But could he open his heart to the man who had left him, who made him feel he was not worthy of being loved? What would he have to say? What did he want from Luke? Finally, after days of reflection, Luke decided he was ready. Not to forget, but to listen. To give himself a chance to understand and perhaps move forward with more clarity. He didn't know if he would be able to completely forgive, but he knew that at least he needed to take that step to stop carrying that weight. The meeting was arranged in a discreet cafe in the city of Santa Clarita, where the streets were quiet and the sounds of everyday life seemed distant. When Luke arrived, his heart was racing. He felt as if he was at a crossroads, not just in his relationship with his father, but in his own life's journey. He had the feeling that this meeting would represent more than just a simple conversation. It was a key to close a cycle, or perhaps to open a new one. When he entered the cafe, he saw Ricardo sitting at a corner table, looking down, his hands clasped on the table. He looked like an aged man, the weight of years and choices reflected in his face. When their eyes met, there was a moment of profound silence. Ricardo slowly stood up, with an expression of hesitation. He looked bigger than Luke remembered, but the look was still the same. The man who had been his father, but who was now, in a way, a stranger. "Luke," Ricardo said with a trembling voice, He seemed to be trying to gather courage, but his withdrawn posture and faltering words clearly showed how sorry he was. "I know you have every right to hate me. What I did was unforgivable. I abandoned you, and I can't take that away from you. But I need to apologize. I was lost. I was so consumed by my own fears and failures that I didn't see what I was doing to you. I failed as a father, and I can't change that. I can only ask for forgiveness and try to do what I can to be different if you let me." Luke looked at him, and the pain he felt was no longer just anger, but a mixture of sadness, empathy, and also a sense of closure. He was there, listening to his father's words, and didn't know what to say at first. For years, he had wanted to hear this, but at the same time, the depth of the suffering his father had caused still echoed within him. It was difficult, but for a moment, he let the anger dissipate. "I don't know if I can forgive you completely, Dad. I don't know. You did something that has no explanation. I felt alone for so long. But today, I am no longer the boy you abandoned. I am someone who found the strength to move forward, to create something beautiful with my music and with the support of the people around me. I no longer carry that pain, but I can't simply ignore what happened between us. What you did was a profound mistake. But hearing this from you, it helps me close this part of my life. I can't promise we'll be like before. I don't know what will happen between us, but I know that my life is much bigger than the pain you caused me. I want to move forward, and for that, I need peace. Peace for myself." Ricardo fell silent, absorbing his son's words. He looked down, with tears in his eyes. "I understand, son. I understand that I don't deserve more than this. I just hope that one day you can give me a chance to be part of your life in some way." Luke didn't respond immediately. He still felt a mixture of feelings that he couldn't resolve at that moment. But as he looked at his father, he realized that what mattered most now was not the past, but the future. He was ready to move forward, to allow himself to continue his journey, knowing that, although forgiveness was a process, he had already taken the first step. The meeting didn't heal all the wounds, but it gave Luke the freedom to no longer be tied to the past. As they stood up to say goodbye, Luke felt a lightness in his heart. He didn't know what the future held, but now he was sure that he didn't need to carry the weight of anger anymore. He was allowing himself to heal. And at that moment, the greatest gift he could give himself was the freedom to move on. Luke's music project had started as something simple, but over time, it had transformed into a true revolution in the small community of Santa Clarita. Over the months, more and more children and adults joined the project, eager to be part of something bigger, something that not only celebrated music, but also inclusion and diversity. What began as a choir of children with disabilities expanded into a movement that touched the hearts of everyone around it. Luke never imagined that his simple idea of bringing children together to sing and express themselves through music could become such a powerful force. What he didn't know was that by creating a space where all children, regardless of their limitations, could sing, express themselves, and be heard, he was giving those children not just the opportunity to sing, but also the chance to feel truly seen and valued. The choir, initially small with just a handful of children, was now growing every month. They came from different schools, different neighborhoods, and with various needs. Some had motor disabilities, others were deaf, and others were dealing with emotional traumas. But one thing they all had in common: they all wanted to be part of that group that transformed pain into harmony and difficulty into art. Luke, who had started this project with the idea of expressing himself and healing through music, soon realized that his mission went beyond his own healing. Music had a transformative power, not just for him, but for everyone involved. He knew he had something more to offer, something that was not just musical, but profoundly human. He wanted to teach those children to believe in their own worth, to know that regardless of their challenges, they could achieve their goals and shine in the most authentic way possible. It was when he started bringing specialized teachers for the classes that the project truly gained new life. The first teacher he brought in was Sarah, a musician with years of experience working with children with autism and motor difficulties. Sarah knew how to make a child who couldn't speak express themselves through music, how to make a child who couldn't move their fingers play the piano with their heart. She was brilliant, but more importantly, she had infinite patience, something that Luke knew was crucial for the success of the project. The project no longer limited itself to singing or playing. It involved composition workshops where the children could create their own songs and writing sessions where they could put into words the feelings they couldn't always express verbally. Music was not just an entertainment tool, but a path to self-expression, emotional healing, and, most importantly, building self-esteem. As the project expanded, Luke became an example, not just for the choir children, but also for the community. He was showing that everyone had something valuable to offer, no matter who they were or where they came from. The idea that music could unite people from different backgrounds and abilities began to spread quickly, and soon the choir became a symbol of inclusion. Local businesses, schools, and even health organizations started supporting the project. They saw the positive impact it had, not just on the children, but on the entire city. Luke started receiving invitations to give lectures and workshops on the importance of inclusion and music in people's lives. His story spread, and he was recognized for his ability to transform adversity into something beautiful. However, he never let success get to his head. He knew that the true impact was not in the plaques or awards he received, but in the personal stories of transformation of each child who passed through his project. Let's play a game with those who only read the comments. Type milkshake if you've made it this far. Only those who made it will understand. Now, let's continue with the story. It was when the group participated in a local community event, an annual music and arts festival, that the project reached new heights. The choir's performance was a milestone. It wasn't just a performance, it was a spectacle of overcoming. Applauded by hundreds of people who were there to support the cause, the children were not just singing. They were becoming symbols of a new way of seeing inclusion in society. The audience was moved to see how each note, each chord, represented more than just music. It was the representation of a movement, a collective effort to ensure everyone was seen, heard, and respected. At that event, Luke had a moment of introspection. He looked at the children's faces on the stage, the expression of joy and pride in their eyes, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. He knew that this performance, this moment of recognition, was a reflection of everything they had achieved. And more than that, he knew that the project had become a beacon for those who believed that inclusion was just an abstract idea and not a possible reality. The project continued to grow, expand, and become increasingly inclusive and comprehensive. The number of participants kept increasing. More and more volunteers offered to help, bringing new perspectives and skills. Community support grew, and schools around Santa Clarita began to integrate the music project into their extracurricular activities. Looking back, Luke realized how much he had changed. He was no longer the boy who had been left behind. He had become someone who was making a difference in the lives of others. And what started as a simple idea, a way to express himself through music, was now a movement that was transforming lives, inspiring those who thought inclusion was a distant possibility and something that only existed in speeches. And so, after yet another performance, with the choir gathered and the entire city supporting the project, Luke sat on the edge of the stage and reflected. Music had become a bridge between pain and healing, between exclusion and acceptance, between the impossible and the possible, and he knew there was still much more to be done. But at that moment, he was certain that he had found his true mission, not just as a musician, but as someone who could inspire others to believe in themselves, to believe in the power of music and the strength of a community united by inclusion. The city of Santa Clarita would never be the same after the silent revolution that Luke and his music project had started. The choir that began with a few children playing simple notes had now become a symbol of perseverance, overcoming adversity, and inclusion. The power of music, transforming lives and breaking down barriers, spread throughout the city, becoming something greater than anyone could have imagined. The children who once felt invisible or marginalized began to stand out not just as artists, but as leaders in their communities. They were the voices that brought forth stories of pain and overcoming, of feelings that were once silenced, but now echoed loud and clear through the songs they created. The choir's performances were not just about vocal technique, but about the power to express oneself, to be heard, to be respected. But the impact wasn't just on the choir children. The city as a whole began to change. Over time, local schools started adopting Luke's project's inclusion model in their curricular activities. More teachers began incorporating music as a pedagogical tool, not just to teach theory, but to promote social inclusion and self-esteem among all students. Luke, with his project, showed everyone that education and culture didn't have to be exclusive. They could be for everyone, regardless of their differences. The transformation went beyond the city. The choir's performances began to be broadcast on media platforms and local television programs, attracting attention not just from the Santa Clarita community, but from many other cities around. The impact of Luke's story and his choir was immediate and genuine. Messages of support came from different parts of the United States and even from other countries. The music and the message of inclusion had touched people in a way that few things could. In one of these broadcasts, Luke had an unexpected encounter with someone who would become a great ally in the project's future. Marina Torres, a renowned music producer who had been deeply moved by the choir's performance, contacted Luke after watching the presentation. She said she believed in the project's power and wanted to help expand it, making it an even broader movement. She saw not just the musical talent of the children, but the profound message they carried. Marina knew that Luke's impact shouldn't be limited to a small town. She wanted to take that project to a global audience. But Luke didn't want the project to lose its essence in the pursuit of fame. He knew the value of staying focused on the core of his work, which was to give voice and dignity to every child who joined the choir. He accepted Marina's help, but on the condition that the priority would continue to be inclusion and social transformation. Through this collaboration, the project gained new visibility. More children from all over the country began to sign up. More volunteers and teachers offered to help. The project was no longer limited to Santa Clarita. It had become a network that united people from different backgrounds and stories to promote acceptance and appreciation of diversity. What had once been just a small local initiative was becoming a national movement. With increasing visibility, Luke was invited to conferences, debates, and meetings with other community leaders. He became a living example of how music, art, and inclusion could unite people and transform society positively. Luke began to receive the recognition that once seemed so distant. However, he never lost sight of what motivated him: the children's smiles as they took the stage, holding hands firmly during rehearsals, and the parents' words of gratitude as they saw their children flourish in an environment of acceptance. More importantly, the project's impact wasn't limited to the moments of performances. The children began to transform their lives, their families, and their communities. Many of them, once unmotivated or with low self-esteem, began to believe in themselves. Some, who once never imagined they could express themselves in public, now dreamed of the future. What was a simple musical performance had become a tool for personal and collective transformation. Moreover, the project had an impact that Luke never imagined. It inspired other cities to create their own musical inclusion programs. Cities from different states began to take an interest in the Santa Clarita model, and soon the project spread to different regions, becoming a beacon of hope and change. Now more mature and even more aware of the responsibility he carried, Luke reflected on what the project represented. He knew that his work would never end. As long as there was a child with the potential to sing, create, express themselves, and be part of something bigger, Luke would be there, supporting, teaching, inspiring. Music had become his greatest legacy, not as a means to fame, but as a vehicle for social transformation. What started as a way to heal his own wounds was now healing the wounds of so many others. And looking to the future, Luke didn't just see a path of personal success, but a path of continuous impact and change, where the power of music and inclusion would be the pillars of a better world. Do you believe that Luke truly found the strength to overcome his past and turn his pain into something powerful? Or was it the need to rebuild himself that drove him to create something so grand? Rate this story from 0 to 10. What grade would you give it? Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell to follow all our stories, and check out more exciting stories by clicking here on the final screen.